Sure. Okay, so what we're going to look at tonight is Krishnamurti's book, The Awakening of Intelligence. I highly recommend this book. And we're going to look at a chapter in it. But before we do that, Chip asked me when I met him the other day, bottom line, what is it we all want? Why are we even coming to these meetings? What is it we're looking for? And I think what it is the source of all being. What is the background of all being? When in non-duality, they talk about your true nature, what do they mean? What is that? What is the ground of all being upon which everything appears? So that's the main question that I think we're looking for an answer to. And I think tonight, Krishnamurti might point to that for us. But first, I just want to briefly tell you what Krishnamurti means by what he calls the source of all being. He says, the sacred, he calls it the sacred, is encountered when the mind is completely still, free from conditioning, free from conflict, and free from the movement of the me. In this profound silence, there is a sense of the immeasurable, the timeless presence, a quality of sacredness that is not the product of thought or belief, but arises naturally when the mind is quiet and attentive. This presence, the essence of it, is being itself, being itself. Sacred presence as the ground of all being is not a state to be achieved, but is the ever-present reality that is revealed when the mind is silent and free from identification with this me. Sacred presence is not an object or a feeling or an experience that can be grasped. It is the dissolution of the sense of separateness and the direct realization of oneness and wholeness. This presence is characterized by qualities such as peace, love, and contentment, but ultimately it transcends all attributes and descriptions. So that's what we're looking to see. Can we touch that? Can there be a realization of that? However, we have to see who's asking that question. Because if that question is coming from the me can never find it. The me will never know it. Because the me is made up of thought, and it will not be found through thought. So now I'm going to read some paragraphs for you from The Awakening of Intelligence. I'm looking at the last chapter of the book. The last chapter is a dialogue between Krishnamurti and the theoretical physicist David Bohm. And they're talking about this, but they're talking about this in terms, they're using the word intelligence. Now, intelligence here is not meant, measuring of an IQ. It has a totally different meaning in this talk here with Krishnamurti and Bohm. So let's explore what this is. Bohm says to him, considering many of the things you have said, you would say intelligence is not thought. You say thought takes place in the old brain. It's a physical process, electrochemical. It has been amply proved by science that all thought is essentially a physical, chemical process. Then we could say, perhaps, that intelligence is not of the same order, is not of the order of time at all, because thought and time are one. Because, you know, thought can go through time, right? Past, future, right? This happened then, that's all part of our thinking and part of memory, which is made up of thought. So Bohm says, if you say thought is physical, then the mind or intelligence or whatever you want to call it seems different, of a different order. Would you say there's a real difference between the physical and intelligence? Krishnamurti says, yes. Are we saying that thought is matter? Bohm says, well, I would rather call it a material process. So Krishnamurti says, all right, thought is a material process. So what is the relationship between that and intelligence? Is intelligence a product of thought? And Bohm says, well, I think we can take it for granted that it's not. And Kay says, why do we take it for granted? And Bohm says, well, simply because thought is mechanical. And Kay says, yes, thought is mechanical. And Bohm says, and intelligence is not. So Krishnamurti says, thought is measurable. Intelligence is not. And how does it happen that this intelligence comes into existence? If thought has no relationship with intelligence, then is the cessation of thought the awakening of intelligence? Bohm says, are you saying, or intelligence may be there always? Krishnamurti says, I'm asking, is it there always? And Bohm says, well, it may or may not be. Is it possible that something interferes with intelligence? Remember, he's saying, what brings this about? Krishnamurti, is intelligence out of time and therefore not related to thought, which is a movement of time? And Bohm says, but thought must be related to it. Krishnamurti says, is it? I'm asking. I think it's not related. Bohm says, unrelated? But there seems to be some relation in the sense that you distinguish between intelligent thought and unintelligent thought. And Krishnamurti says, yes, but that requires intelligence to recognize unintelligent thought. Krishnamurti said, thought is time. Thought is a movement in time. Thought is measurable, and thought functions in the field of time, all moving, changing, transforming. Is intelligence within the field of time? Thought is mechanical, says Krishnamurti. Being mechanical, it can move in different directions and all the rest of it. Is intelligence mechanical? And Bohm says, well, let's get it clear. Intelligence cannot be dependent on conditions for its truth. Nevertheless, it seems that in some sense, intelligence doesn't operate if the brain is not healthy. Krishnamurti says, obviously. So Bohm says, in that sense, intelligence seems to depend on the brain. Krishnamurti, or is it the quietness of the brain? All right, says Bohm, it depends on the quietness of the brain. K, Krishnamurti says, not on the activity of the brain. Bohm says, so I propose that intelligence depends for its existence on this brain, which can indicate harmony or non-harmony. But the brain does not have anything to do with the content of intelligence. So then Krishnamurti says, so if the brain is not harmonious, can intelligence function? Bohm says, well, that's a good question. And Krishnamurti says, it cannot function if the brain is hurt. And Bohm says, if intelligence doesn't function, is there intelligence? Therefore, it seems that intelligence requires the brain in order to exist. Now, remember, the question was, where does this intelligence come from? Where does it arise if it has not to do with thought? What is this? And so, if intelligence doesn't function, is there intelligence? And Krishnamurti says, but the brain is only an instrument. And Bohm says, which indicates harmony or disharmony. Krishnamurti says, but the brain is not the creator of intelligence. Bohm says, the brain doesn't create intelligence, but it's an instrument which helps intelligence to function. He says, Bohm, the quietness of the instrument is the operation of intelligence. So now let's see what this all means, because as human beings, we are riddled with this constant chatter, right? This constant chatter. And this constant chatter is all about me and mine, our fears, our joys, our problems, our hopes, our dreams. It all has to do with me. And that's thought. That's thought moving. So now, just a minute. So now, just a minute. Krishnamurti introduces something which is not of the order of thought. This is amazing. So then what is it? How does it come to be? Now he calls it intelligence, so we have to be careful that we don't think of intelligence as we usually think of it. Let's find out, what is this?
Okay.
Yeah, let's just finish and then we'll ask the questions. So, okay, I think I lost my place. Okay. So Bohm is saying the quietness of the instrument, the brain, is the operation of intelligence, and the non-quietness of the instrument is the failure of intelligence. And Krishnamurti says, so how does this intelligence take place? Not how, he says. When does it awaken? Now, this is very important because creativity, remember we said, creativity cannot come from a busy mind. Creativity cannot come from a busy, self-involved me. It only appears when the mind is quiet. And in that stillness, creativity happens. So now he's getting to that. I believe he's going to get to that. So then what awakens intelligence? Bohm says, you might perhaps say the condition for it to awaken is the non-operation of thought. Yes, says Krishnamurti. And Krishnamurti goes on to say, any movement of thought in any direction, vertical, horizontal, in action or non-action, is still in time, any movement of thought. then what is the relationship of that movement to this intelligence, which is not a movement, which is not of time, which is not the product of thought? Where can the two even meet? And is there a relationship at all? Krishnamurti, relationship meaning being in contact with, recognition, a feeling of being in touch with. Bohm says, two things may be related without contact, but by simply being in harmony. It might also mean in some way keeping in the same order. And Krishnamurti says, in the same order, in the same direction, in the same depth, in the same intensity. Yes, all that is harmony. But can thought ever be harmonious? Thought as a movement, can it be harmonious? Because thought, as it actually moves, is always contradictory. Therefore, it has no harmony in itself, but intelligence has harmony in itself. In the movement of thought, this is Krishnamurti talking, is there harmony? If there is, then it has a relationship with intelligence. If there is no harmony, but contradictions and all the rest of it, then thought has no relationship with intelligence. And Bohm said, well, then would you say that we could do entirely without thought? Krishnamurti said, I'd put it a different way. Intelligence uses thought. All right, says Bohm, but how can it use something which is disharmony, which is disharmonious? Krishnamurti says, expression, communication, using thought which is contradictory, which is not harmonious, to create things in the world. But then Krishnamurti says, but what is intelligence? And what is not intelligence? Or is it possible because words are thought and time and measure? So can we even define it? And Bohm says, because we're not using it for its content or its meaning, but rather as a, I'm sorry, let me go back. Krishnamurti says, what is intelligence? Or is it possible? How do we even talk about it? And Bohm says, well, we can't put it in words, but we're trying to point. Can we say that thought can function as a pointer to intelligence? And then its contradictions don't even matter. Krishnamurti says, that's right. Bohm says, because we're not using it, thought, for its content or its meaning, but rather as a pointer, which points beyond the domain of time. Krishnamurti. So thought is a pointer. The content is intelligence. Now, please stay with me because I think this comes to a really interesting awareness. Krishnamurti says, thought, matter, intelligence, do they have a common source? He says, I think they have. Boom. Otherwise, there could be no harmony, of course. But Krishnamurti said, you see, thought has conquered the world. Do you understand? Conquered. Bohm says, you mean dominates the world. Krishnamurti, thought, the intellect, dominates the world. And therefore, intelligence has very little place here. When one thing dominates, the other must be subservient. Bohm. Well, one asks, I don't know if it's relative, but how did that come about? Krishnamurti, that's fairly simple. Now remember, when he's talking about thought, in order to help us see how we can use it in our everyday life, you can substitute that for me. Me. Okay. It's almost over. It's almost. So Krishnamurti said, well, that's fairly simple. thought must have security. It is seeking security in all its movement. But intelligence is not seeking security. It has no security. The idea of security doesn't exist in intelligence. Intelligence itself is secure. It doesn't seek security. Yes, but how did that come about? How? Krishnamurti says, fairly simple. Pleasure, comfort, physical security. First of all, physical security, and that becomes very important. So as we were saying the other day, the whole Western world is based on measure, and the Eastern world tried to get beyond that, but they used thought to get beyond it. So Bob says what they tried, and Krishnamurti says they tried to go beyond the measure by exercising thought. Therefore, they were caught in thought. Now, security, physical security is necessary. And therefore, physical existence, physical pleasure, physical well-being became tremendously important. Bohm says, well, that's what made the brain very chaotic and noisy. And intelligence is the silence of the brain. Therefore, the noisy brain is not intelligence. Okay. So I'm trying to skip so we can. Okay, so wait a minute. Bohm says, now would you say that when intelligence understands the activity of thought, then thought operates differently? Krishnamurti says yes. If thought has, and I'll give you an example, if thought has created nationalism as a means of security, and then one sees the fallacy of it, the seeing of the fallacy of it is intelligence. Thought then creates a different kind of world in which nationalism doesn't exist, nor division, nor war, nor conflict. Intelligence, says Bohm, sees the falseness of what's going on. And when thought is free of this falseness, it's different. And then it becomes to be a parallel to intelligence. And therefore, Krishnamurti says, thought has its place. And Bohm says, that's very interesting, because thought is never actually controlled or dominated by intelligence. Thought always moves on its own. But in the light of intelligence, when the falseness is seen, then thought moves parallel and in harmony. So they're saying, in order for intelligence to awaken in each of us, there has to be a quiet mind. There has to be a mind that's free of the me. And that free of the me can't happen with the me. The me is not able to free itself. The only way, according to Krishnamurti, this is Krishnamurti's teaching, is by choiceless awareness. Choiceless awareness is seeing, like he just said, the fallacy of things. Seeing seeing the destruction of things, seeing the division of things, seeing the suffering and the cause of the suffering, seeing how the me basically acts on its selfishness and self-centeredness. And from that it moves. Just seeing, choiceless awareness. And what is intelligence? Intelligence is the doing. Why? Because once there's awareness, the mind becomes still. Because remember, with awareness, there is no editorializing. There's just a seeing, just observing. without the me, just direct insight into the situation, whatever that might be. And with that, the mind quiets and it wakens intelligence. And with intelligence, there is clarity, compassion, and right action. That's what Krishnamurti is pointing to here. That's why this book is called The Awakening of Intelligence. Now, just to end this, they go on to say, but is there one source? Is there something that this is all based on? So, wait, let me see if I can find it. Because the way they say it is so much better. Well, I would say, says Krishnamurti, that thought must be completely still for the awakening of intelligence. There can't be a movement of thought and yet the awakening of that. So as a human being, I would be concerned only with this central issue. I know how confused, contradictory, disharmonious one's life is. Is it possible to change that so that intelligence can function in my life, so that I can live without disharmony, so that the pointer, the direction is guided by intelligence? And that's perhaps why the religious people, instead of using the word intelligence, have used the word God. Can thought be a pointer to God? And then Bohm says, well, God is perhaps a metaphor for intelligence, but people don't usually take it as a metaphor, no. So, but what is it possible? Bohm says, so, but is it possible for the human being to reach the source of it all, to touch that source? And Krishnamurti says, because we are consumed by thought, by the cleverness of thought, by the movement of thought, all the gods, all the meditations will not do it. And so can the mind keep the purity of the original source? The original pristine clarity of that energy, which is not touched by the corruption of thought. And then Krishnamurti says, people have asked this question for thousands of years. And so he says, the way it can happen, that there can be an awakening, and that we can touch this source, again, is by the quietness of the mind, the stillness, getting in touch with that stillness, being free of this me.
So, Evie, actually, the whole thing was summarized in the first couple of paragraphs that you read. Because the flowering of intelligence, intelligence, the way I take it and understand is intelligence, a word given to the quality of my being.
Right.
When there's no movement of thought, when I'm not listening to my ego chattering, my desires, my fears, my jealousies, my ambitions, my whatever it is, right? And I sit and I am totally in silence. That experience of silence, he's calling, if we have to call it something, yes, intelligence.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay. And he's saying that as if thought starts to move and you slip back into the ego, the intelligence is gone. It's sacrificed.
Yes. Right. Right.
But then he seems to be saying that that intelligence can use thought
Yes.
as a pointer.
No, thought becomes a pointer to intelligence, but intelligence then can use thought to communicate,
Yes.
to manifest things, because it's using it, but it's motivated, it's driven by intelligence, and intelligence has to do with wholeness. Whereas thought is fragmented, intelligence is whole. It sees the big picture of things.
So if I go into the AI laboratory and they first drain my bodily fluids, so it drains all the ego thoughts, all the ego-ness, right? And then they give me the next fluid, which is a mixture of all the eternal virtues, truth, beauty, kindness, justice, whatever the virtues are, all the eternal virtues, and that's the lifeblood of my being. I no longer come from a self-centered point of view. I embody eternal verities. I embodied living the virtuous good life, and from that mixture, thought becomes that mixture shapes the kind of thinking that I do.
Right. Now, I just want to say, which I neglected to put in here, which is very important. So to Krishnamurti, the source is energy, but it's energy that doesn't move. And he says, as soon as it moves, it goes into thought. When it's not moving, it's intelligence. But it's all basically has the same, the same ground of being, which he does call energy. But, and it's interesting because Balthasar also talks. Well, he talks about consciousness that moves and consciousness that doesn't move. So he's calling it energy. And he's saying when it doesn't move, there's a stillness. But it's interesting, he said, you can't even name it because it's not nameable. You can only know it.
Well, that's why he suggests silence. That's why he suggests quietness, because it's only if you get to that state, that you might possibly find out if there is such a state. He's not saying that it is exactly. I think most of his readings point to that's something that you can find out and only you can find out about it.
That's right. And that's what he calls that sacred presence. That's sacredness, if according to him, that's what's sacred. And he calls it immeasurable. And in some of his writings, especially in his notebook, he makes reference to this.
Yeah, well.
And it's quite beautiful. And his awakening to this source of all being.
I was just thinking, I mentioned AI in a kind of flippant way, but I was talking to this person the other day who has lost 15 pounds by taking the Wegovy drug, one of those drugs. And she was telling me that it absolutely erases any thoughts about food. It's like food drops out of your awareness. Where before they would always look forward to lunch, think about this, treat it. It's like it's no longer anything that they give thought to. As a matter of fact, she said the other day she felt dizzy and she realized she hadn't eaten anything. It's like you got to force yourself to remember to eat. How do we know that they're not? And so that must somehow that must somehow disrupt neural networks.
Well, that's right.
How do we know AI is not going to be able to take a little chip stocked full of the eternal virtues, right? And plant that in your head. And now all your self preoccupations, your music will all be about truth, beauty, justice, kindness, compassion, and then you'll have it.
So everybody becomes the same, and it sounds like it would become a very boring world.
Why? Why?
Everybody thinking the same way?
Well, everybody
No,
has
no, they wouldn't. They
you
wouldn't
would
think.
still not.
No, Google. They wouldn't think the same way. But instead of coming from a basic starting point of me, my, and
That
mine,
would be
they
All
our.
would.
right, wait a minute. Just think of it this way. The creator, whatever that is, that put all this stuff together, whatever that is, if he hadn't, I can't believe that something mechanical that's not organic is gonna come in and change the nature of a human being. I just don't believe it.
Well, we don't know.
Well. What do you have to say about the example I just gave?
Well, but that's a mechanical example.
It is. Yeah, this is what I'm
Well,
saying.
you accumulate a bunch of chemicals and you throw them in your arm. It could be dope, it could be narcotics, it could be whatever,
Right.
but it alters the natural functioning of the mind. And that's I think there's something to my mind anyhow,
Well, but
something wrong with that.
we don't even have to get into that because we're interested without any drugs, without any chips in
Yeah, absolutely.
we're
That's an
interested.
interesting phrase that he used. Then what we are talking about is the natural functioning of the mind.
Yes,
And the natural functioning of the mind is dominated by a survival mentality.
that's right.
Look what's going on in the world.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
Me
right.
first.
Well, that's
Yeah.
why
Greed.
that's
Power.
right. That's why the most important question for those of us that are in a position to even ask it, because we're not in poverty, we're not starving, we're not being threatened with our lives,
Not
we're not
yet.
being threatened with deportation, not yet. We have the luxury of asking the question, what will awaken that intelligence in me to free me of this me, if it's even possible? What will awaken the intelligence so that moment by moment, we're acting from a place of clarity and compassion and creativity? Can you imagine the creativity of a me-less mind, of a mind that's calm and quiet and open and receptive?
Well,
And it's interesting because John Klein says that when he talks about art, he says art can awaken in you that intelligence. That art can be a pointer to that. So think of when it's art that's coming not from a me.
Yeah, but that's the whole trick. The whole trick is to be able to see what the me is, to understand what it is. And that understanding, it's just not a couple of pages that we read. You got to read a lot more of Krishnamurti. But uh, it involves trying to untangle this whole thing of what the hell is thought. And that it's actually of the thought as we use as Krishnamurti uses it, it's thought, the accumulation of experience that's deposited in your consciousness, as whatever the experience is, and the inability of most of us to be able to record an accurate recording of what takes place. It's usually distorted by past events that have come in. That until you can get to that and start unraveling that you can have some kind of an idea of what thought is, and then you can relate that to how it affects how it shows up, how we talk about it as being the me.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
of course, but you got to get that understanding. I mean, I lose it all the time. I mean, I can't stay with it for very, very long. I get into the me.
But that's why I think it's so beautiful when Krishnamurti talks about choiceless awareness. So he's kind of giving you a tool. He's saying you can be choicelessly aware. That means that in a situation where one's reaction is coming from a me, and that reaction, let's say, is envy or anger. If there is choiceless awareness, in that moment, there's a seeing that that's what's reacting. In that moment, one sees that's the me. And the me is made up of thought. Because is there a me independent of thought? We think there is. We think that there's me and my thoughts separate. But that's not really what it is. The me is the thought is the me. Because the thought is made up, as you said, Ugo, of all our past experiences, all the memories, all the hurts, all the compliments, all the happy times, all the sad times. It's locked into our brain cells as memory.
Thought is the past.
And that's okay, as long as the past doesn't come into the present. With choiceless awareness, he's saying that's the tool to see when the past is reacting to the present. And that usually happens in relationship, right? That's usually when that happens. Suddenly, you're reacting rather than just being. You know, it's like, what would it be like if you're in a situation that may be tense and causing some disruption, and there's an immediate seeing of a reaction on your part? Wouldn't that be wonderful in that moment to pull the plug on it and to get full clarity of what may be going on inside of you and what the other person in your relationship is attempting to say to you or not, when there's blame, when there's criticism, when there's a withholding. You see, I think that with intelligence, with choiceless awareness first, and then intelligence as to how to act rightly, then relationship is really very beautiful. And that could be a relationship with another person, a relationship with an idea, a relationship with a project. You know, our life is relationship. But the me, the self-centered me, is not capable of clarity. It can't. It's thought, it's the past, and it's bringing the past into the present.
Well, anybody else have anything to say?
Shit.
I like your example. I like it. I like that example very much. And catching it right in that moment.
That's right.
And being aware to say something, to speak that, to catch that.
To catch
It's
that.
powerful. That's very powerful.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But you see, it can't be with anger. I was working with someone this morning, and she was saying that when she's having a talk with her partner, he dismisses her feelings. And that triggers a lot of anger in her. And so she responds back with anger, and then he accuses her of being attacking of him. So he doesn't see how he may have triggered this, because all he sees is the anger. Now, if what arises for her is hurt and anger in the moment, she has to be permitted to feel it. However, if she doesn't act on it, doesn't say anything, just lets herself feel whatever it is that's coming up, and then saying to him, holding up a mirror, this is one of the times when I feel you're attacking me for saying something that I pointed out to you before. She pointed out to him, and now you're attacking me. Now, it's in that moment, this is all happening. There's no time doesn't come in and create another mess. In that moment, he's able, hopefully, not always, to see where he was coming from with this, where his past was bringing into the present. And she's able to see where her past is responding in the present.
Right.
And you can pull a plug on that. Mm-hmm. Because the seeing is the doing. Mm-hmm. The minute you see it, now the doing is the clarity, the compassion, and the right action. You're right, I'm sorry. I guess I did do that. I'm glad you pointed that out to me, because now I'm learning things about myself that I wasn't aware of before, or that I was aware of, but I ignored. Mm-hmm. And now, because I want to be in relationship with you, I'm no longer going to ignore that. But if I do it again, please hold up that mirror to me again.
So the choiceless awareness,
Yeah.
if you could just give us an example, or maybe that was the
Go
example of it. What's the example? You're saying the choiceless awareness is the practice, right? So what's an example of the choice? Like how are you going to use choiceless awareness in your life?
Okay. I'll give you an example of somebody else I've worked with, because I love how she did this. Yeah. She was talking to her ex-husband, whom she hasn't spoken to in years. They have 3 grandchildren whom he has no relationship with. And she's furious at him for that. But he's getting older, he's not that well. So she said, all right, I'll give him a call to see how he's doing. And she says to him in the course of a conversation, you have 3 grandchildren. She's sticking it. And he's giving all yes, I know, but they didn't call me. I didn't call them. And she saw what happened in that moment. She saw what she did. She saw his reaction. And she pulled the plug, because she said, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not going there. That was a moment of choiceless awareness. And with that came clarity, and with that came right action. And she dropped it. And the conversation just went on until it was over. So it's so beautiful when, first of all, you're aware now of choiceless awareness. What does that mean? It means she didn't become aware of what she did. When she stuck it to him, you have 3 grandchildren, She didn't say, oh, that was a bitchy thing. I should have never done that. That's not choiceless awareness. Now that's the me that came in, now beating her own self up. She didn't do any of that. There was a seeing, with no movement of thinking. There was just a seeing. And then came what he's calling intelligence, which was then right action.
Which was the dropping of it.
Which was the total dropping of it, without criticizing herself or criticizing him. That's not how it started. And this could have gone into a huge fight, with both of them feeling horrible. And it was not happening. That didn't happen. Choiceless awareness. It's like a spotlight in the moment of what's happening.
So Evie, choiceless awareness is more or less the sort of the ground of being, you might say. And that allows then intelligence to occur.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The seeing is the doing. Those are Krishnamurti's words, by the way.
But for intelligence, you have to have choiceless awareness coming first. There's a slight difference between the two.
That's right. Correct. Correct. A slight difference.
Yeah.
That's right. And then when what I can't even say what you hope for, because that's the me again, hoping. But when there's intelligence operating and the mind is quiet, there's a possibility that there is a connection with the true ground of all being, which we're not even using words for. But there is something else. Very often, in the middle of the night, everything's quiet, and there's an awareness that the mind is totally still. In that awareness, there's a stillness that seems to fill the whole room. And suddenly, there's a creating happening. It takes the form of thought, but that thought is a point to something else. And so very often I send that out. In the morning, I write it out and I send it out. But I have to say, it doesn't feel like it's me. It's something in that stillness. And I've heard that from other people as well. That when there's the getting into that stillness, something creativity happens, or creation happens.
Yeah, and he also says that it's in that quietness that's required to see what is. You're getting rid of the judgmental part of a human being, that is the ego. And when your mind is still and it's quiet, it's the only time that you can really see what it, without any judgment at all. You get rid of the judgment factor of the me. And in that state, which I don't know if I've had it very often or not, you see what is, you see truth. There is no way, there is no way of not seeing what's happening, because the only thing that's in front of you is what's there. But you don't take sides on it. That factor isn't in it. So that's what helps me, because quite frankly, as long as my brain is engaged and I'm having chatter, it's the me that's doing that. It's the ego that's doing that. And that doesn't work. You got to try you try. I mean, sometimes I can drop it easily. Sometimes I got to work on it. And sometimes I get frustrated and I'll handle it some other day.
Okay. Well, okay, so I guess I'm sorry you guys aren't with us. We're having tea now.
And me too.
Next time,
Next time.
Thanks.
Hope.
next time.
Bye.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.